How's it going, everyone? It's been a little bit of a while since I did a live stream, but was going to be doing something with the guests, but then timings, and also because, as you may see when I travel, the background changes quite often, and that's because I travel quite often. So running a sort of travel podcast about geopolitics and current events is a bit of a balancing act, but yes, I wanted to do a live stream nonetheless because I thought I got thinking about what I was going to speak with my guest, and then I began reflecting on sort of after the chaos of the past few months, especially in March, April, when we were sort of doing multiple streams a day. And there are still some people who do that. I just don't see why. Not because it's not important what's happening, but because the frequency of what is happening isn't there anymore or as much as it was. And certainly, today is July 15th. And we can effectively say that this ceasefire has collapsed. War has reignited between the Iranians and the Americans. The MOU of June has held, but it essentially broke down from June 8th. So essentially after June 15th, so literally a week. And of course, the Americans are going to blame the Iranians for this. And the Iranians are going to blame the Americans for this. Now, the Iranians allegedly struck some commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz, and that's triggered these rounds of strikes on Iranian bases, Iranian targets, and subsequent attacks or retaliations by the Iranians on Kuwait, Bahrain seem to be the two main targets that they focus on. And so Trump has now said he's going to reimpose the naval blockade. He threatened the idea of a 20% tariff. And then, of course, he tacoed on that as well. Iran's military had said, I'm just reading off some notes that I'd written down here prior to going live. Iran's military said it struck and disabled two, quote, rogue super tankers. And the Emiratis or UAE said that Iranian missiles had hit two of their tankers in Omani waters. So this isn't really a bilateral conflict. It is a multifaceted, multi-front conflict, traversing the borders of every major nation state in the area, who frankly don't want anything to do with this completely stupid war. Oil has jumped inevitably by about 10% to sort of $80 a barrel. It's probably gone up since I've said that, but the single biggest day and move since early April, though still well below that peak of about 115, 120. Now, the US, and Trump specifically, has warned that it will be striking bridges and power plants next week unless Tehran returns to get a deal. Although we had a deal, so I'm not sure what was wrong with the old one, but apparently we need to negotiate again. And as I say, he rescinded on that, retreated, let's be honest, let's call it what it was. He retreated from his threat of 20% toll on the Strait of Hormuz. And inevitably, this has implications for maritime security, for energy, for the cost of living for all of us stuck in the middle. And the IRGC is continuing to demonstrate it has that disproportionate pressure that it can apply on the Americans. The Americans being the most powerful military in the force, yet unable to subjugate a country which has been on the receiving end of American sanctions for the best part of a decade. Okay, there's been alleviations, but yeah, all of this while we've had extreme demonstrations of support for Ali Khamenei and his funeral procession. Now, of course, those have been inflated because of state media, and it's not clear what the overall sentiment amongst the average Iranian is. But the point is, more specifically, that the Americans' idea that by simply undertaking a war of choice, a decapitation strategy to take out the head of the snake, so to speak, would be enough to scramble not only the remaining leaders of the IRGC and Islamic Republic, but galvanize the population enough that they will stand up and bear arms, take over the government, take over the Islamic Republic. And that's not happened, and it's not going to happen. I made these comments in another conversation I had a couple of days ago. And this is the essence of what I sort of thought I would just make a quick stream about, which is simply, it's all well and good and important to consider the day-to-day shifts, the rockets that have been fired, the projectiles that have been intercepted, the warring words that have been mused. But this does not change the overall picture. The strategic lay of the land is that the United States have failed to achieve their fundamental objectives and are continuing to fail. None of what's happening now in the Strait of Hormuz is going to be enough to shift the overall balance of power, be that within the region, let alone within Iran itself. The IRGC are firmly in control of the situation. And when Ali Khamenei was, when the 12-day war happened, Ali Khamenei made those very concerted efforts to decentralize and redistribute the balance of power, the command and control structure of various elements of the IRGC, just in case something like this, Operation Epic Fury or the Israelis' equivalent, were to happen, so that if and when he was killed, the system would continue to function. And it functions pretty well. Are there hiccups? Of course. But again, that's the sort of, you lose the forest for the trees for the forest, or the forest for the trees, right? The overall picture of this is that the United States has barely achieved anything other than set back its own stockpiles of military capabilities, fundamentally ruin what was already a pretty poor reputation in the Middle East and across the globe, at least in terms of military intervention, and all the while get a lot of people feeling sensitive and empathetic for the Iranian side. Even the Iranians themselves have said, oh, well, we didn't expect when we were supporting or saying, help liberate us, America, we support Donald Trump. Not even the Iranians themselves realized what that actually meant, or what it could have led to and what it did lead to. And so many of them now don't even support the idea of liberation from Trump. They just want an end to the conflict. They want an end to the explosions and in unpredictability, the chaos that is being made towards their day-to-day lives. So even Trump's own rhetoric, not that we would have believed him from the start, or should have believed him, about liberating the Iranian people, well, that's not going very well either. So all in all, yes, look at the tactical, operational levels, the three levels in military strategy: tactical, operational, and strategic. And sure, we could talk about the tankers that were hit and the tumultuality, the unpredictability that shoved into the markets, and the impact, the concern it's had for all of us onlooking. But strategically, it means nothing. It is changing the picture very little. And ultimately, the only thing that were to change it more is if the United States is to commit more military capabilities, more military equipment, more time, more energy. And just as of today, the Congress have blocked another bill, defense bill for Trump, which would be instrumental in widening and deepening his operations in the Middle East, which demonstrates that the American government, even the GOP-dominated legislative branch, is against this war. Trump's own base, his own MAGA base, are out of kilter. This whole thing is a complete dumpster fire, or tires on fire in a dumpster with that on fire as well, right? Just let's compound, let's get all the metaphors we can think of and just pile them on top of this, of each other. This entire situation is a complete clusterfuck. It's a completely pointless situation. The MOU, which wasn't exactly comprehensive or coherent in every way, it was working in that there was limited strikes. If the two did strike, it was very limited, it was very restrained, and then we went back. No, but that's all been completely thrown out the window because Trump doesn't have the patience, the mental sanity, or long-termist view stance to be able to hold back. If he doesn't get immediately what he wants, he's going to bomb them. Let's just throw more weapons at the problem. Let's just attack everything. Let's blow it up all more. Let's make more threats and then run away from those threats once we realize that they're a complete waste of time. Trump has tacoed more in the past year than he did in his entire first term. He has done absolutely nothing to give himself credibility on the international stage. And any time he tries to demonstrate that there is a modicum of genuine intent from what he says, he just backs out of it. Anything that he says is very rarely followed through. And that's why nobody, even the Europeans who we can laugh at for their inaction over certain things in foreign policy, don't take him seriously. You could see images of him when he was at NATO or at the G7 the week before, when he's meeting other heads of state who, yes, are a fraction of his influence in terms of economic and military prowess. He's standing on his own, whilst everybody else is talking amongst themselves. No one wants to have anything to do with it. And all the while, his own team, his own administration are continuously having to pick up the complete mess, clean the bullshit that comes from this guy. So that's why I don't find it very valuable to talk day in, day out, as some other channels and creators seem to do it, looking at every single rocket that's been fired, every single explosion that has occurred. Are they important in terms of, we should be aware of the people that they're affecting, of course, and the implications that they have for the mental sanity of the overall, perhaps day-to-day economics. But if you're looking at the strategic and macroeconomic outlook, these things are not going to change that overall trajectory. The markets themselves have become even somewhat immune, financial markets, indifferent to the unpredictabilities of the wars, specifically in the Middle East. If we talk about the war in Ukraine or the implications for, say, European markets and activities, then perhaps it's a little bit different. But because of the perpetual instability that seems to breed from the Middle East, for better or for worse, we could talk about the colonialist influences of the past hundreds of years, of course, no one's denying that. But in the here and now, the situation is not changing. And all Trump seems to be doing by sending more American equipment and resources is ultimately making America inherently weaker. Is it suddenly going to be weaker than China? No, but certainly it loses the capacity to exert its influence in the same way that it once did. And if you look at the perception of America amongst the average population, not just in sort of countries that are anti-American for the sake of being anti-American, but even countries that have become disillusioned with the United States under Trump, there is literally no one that likes them at all. I think maybe the country that does, well, no, not even the Israelis like Trump at the moment because of his willingness to sort of threaten Israel or withdraw the war from the war and his relationship with Netanyahu. So not even Trump's long-standing supporters in Israel retain a sort of favorable rating. The guy has a negative approval rating everywhere you look. And ultimately, this leads into the overall reputation of America being hit incredibly badly. And the idea, there's a particular data point, which I think is quite interesting, which is the Global Soft Power Index. And this ranks countries basically on their capacity to influence other nations' behavior, other nations' capacity to respond, do certain things, engage in diplomacy, take up cultural, Italy has a very strong export of food, of history, of music. France, the same sort of thing. Britain. Okay, we'll come back to Britain, right? There are countries that have very strong, I'm being facetious, but there are very specific countries with strong exports in soft power ways, not through hardware. America is absolutely it's fallen off a cliff in the soft power index. And guess which major other power is being seen as more favorable? It's the good old Chinese. The Chinese are not doing anything specific. It's just they're not invading other countries. And most of you watching will know that I've said this a million times. But China, all you have to sit back is allow your enemy, never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake, right? And the Chinese they're not necessarily winning friends, but they're not alienating and making enemies, whilst the Americans are, or the Trump administration is. So in my mind, and the best thing about this reputational poll is that Russia and China, aside from soft power, which Russia doesn't really have, given what's happening with Ukraine, but they're more popular than America. That's how bad that this war has gone for the Trump administration. And again, none of this is going to change our lives overnight. Nothing when you wake up tomorrow and you sort of, it's not like the war of Ukraine on February 24th. That was a serial game changer. This is not. This is a glacial shift. These are happening at granular levels, but you have to look at the big picture and pile it all together. When the Chinese are winning favor with more countries in the Middle East, when the Saudis and the Pakistanis are talking about deepening this strategic partnership they already have, when the Europeans are working with the Canadians or the South Americans to develop their own full, free trade agreements, when you've got NATO actively looking at developing their own in-house capabilities and not buying simply from the United States, all of these are a demonstration of the growing diversification and de-risking. Maybe decoupling, but decoupling is quite difficult to do. The overall deviation away from the United States and a precedent being set. I made a video about this a couple of weeks ago, but again, some of you were asking why haven't I done an update on the war in the Middle East in a few days, and that was because I sort of repivoted my focus to the NATO summit, Ukraine, where I do think more systemic change in a shorter amount of time is present. You can see that. But when it comes to the war in the Middle East, or specifically the war in Iran, and specifically more even so, if you go level down level, with the Strait of Hormuz, nothing's happening. Okay, they shoot at some boats, but that doesn't change the overall strategic outlook of this. That's not going to lead to the capitulation and collapse of the Iranian regime. It's not going to lead to Mr. Trump standing up with a treaty saying we won the war, right? This is not a declaration of war. It is a conflict that the United States started at the behest of Israel and their own desire to think that they could somehow beat the Iranians into a pulp within a week. Well, sorry, a day. So this, it's the only way it can change is if you get a sizable shift in the balance of power, if you get a sizable shift in one of the theaters of war. No government has ever been overthrown through air power alone, and that was demonstrated through March and April. And certainly no government is going to be overthrown because of a blockade. Blockades are a complement to a comprehensive military strategy. The reason why the UK's blockade of, say, Napoleon worked was because there was an other set of military angles to it. Land-based warfare, okay, aerial wasn't a thing. Other areas of land-based warfare have been working because they were done in tandem with maritime theatres and the aerial theatres. None of this happens effectively through just one medium alone. And the Trump administration seemed to think that by just blockading a blockade, that's somehow going to solve the problem. It's not. It's just going to piss everybody off and alienate them. And if anything, make the Iranians have more and more power. And of all of this is sort of where I lead to with it, which is that Trump himself comes around to saying, well, actually, maybe the idea of a poll isn't such a bad idea. Sorry, toll. Wait, what? So the guy has suddenly shifted from saying we will never give Iran the capacity to control the Strait of Hormuz to suddenly, well, actually, a toll, a financial sort of incentive, a financial regulatory system may well be a good idea. What? So, and the best part of all of this, just to back up even further on this point, is when I listen to other commentators who still somehow, for some reason, try to find a way to justify or explain the rationale behind this war in the first place. They say, oh, well, the Strait of Hormuz, we have to get it open. We have to rid the Iranians control of it and make it a free passage for maritime, a maritime free passage, a walkway, whatever, right? I'm sorry, what? Wait, hang on. Hey, Siri, was Hormuz a free passage of water on February 27th? You don't have Hamid Kalafana's birthday. Okay, well, Siri's shit. Anyway, yeah, well, I could answer that for myself, right? Before this war started, there was no problem in the Strait of Hormuz. The Trump administration created a problem to derive a solution where there was never anything to do of that nature in the first place. So if you ever hear a commentator, an analyst, an expert saying that this war was started because of the desire to ensure Iran didn't take control of the Strait of Hormuz and utilize it as a weapon, weaponize the Strait, weaponize the global economy, turn them off, find their email, and write them a blunt assessment of, please give up your day job because you're an idiot. Slightly heated there, but just the imbecility, the idiocy of people who talk about this from sort of, well, we need to solve this problem. This problem was not non-existent before the group that you still seem to want to support went in there and decided to interfere and make this dumpster fire of a thing in the first, now that it is. Permanently changing not just the Strait of Hormuz, but overall energy supply lines, maritime supply lines, and security forevermore changed. The way that we look at our near abroad, the way that the Middle East operates, and the way that America is treated, not as a security guarantor, but as a reckless interfering entity under the Trump administration. This isn't me to say that I'm hating on everything America, not at all. And luckily, though, I will just caveat that most people who say those things are far and few between, but they still do exist. Most people agree that this war was the stupidest thing. The war in Iran and in Ukraine is different in that it is driven by an ideological, not that it's justifiable, don't get me wrong, but sort of the motivations behind it are driven by something so deep-seated within Putin that he felt the need to go to war and decimate his own country over. Versus Iran, which is a completely unnecessary war that has led to nothing but, well, everything that I've laid out. And ultimately, the country that will eventually, once the war does somehow stabilize, or maybe it doesn't, I'll come to that in a second, but let's go with the hypotheticality that it does, that it will stabilize and we'll just sort of, Iran will come out of it much wealthier. They'll come out of it much wealthier. They'll come out of it much more influential as a regional player, even more than they were already. It's given them strategic clarity, as I've said many times before, in a way that they may have known before, but Trump's really helped the Iranians in some ways. And ultimately, all of this, the Iranian people are still suffering. There's plenty of torture, kidnappings, killings, whatever, hangings by the regime against their people for, supporting independence or speaking out against the system or any dissidents at all. That's not a system that can be done. You don't see that happening in other autocratic nations in Africa because they don't have as strong a hold on the situation. You don't see that happening in Somalia because al-Shabaab doesn't have as situational control as the Islamic Republic does. If a country feels comfortable enough to continue to do what it did to its people that led to this war, some people argue in the first place, or one of the motivations, as we saw with the riots in January, if they have the ability to continue this, then they're not on the back foot. They're not on the verge of collapse. So this war is not going to go anywhere. And it leads me to the last point, which is that this is the new normal. We live in this new reality where every day you'll wake up and there's been a tanker strike, there's been a base hit, there's been something done. And this is, I think, a very good example of where unstoppable force meets an immovable object. The United States has never gone up against a country, at least, well, in more recent years, as deeply embedded and established as the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran has made it very clear from the get-go that they didn't want to be seen as Syria or Libya or Iraq, in that they would become a failed state or a failing state with a dysfunctional government, clans and different factions fighting for control of respective regions. So they clamped down hard. And ultimately, we have severely underestimated, or those within certain decision-making positions, the ideological fanaticism, but also the pragmatic application that they have in how they've built this system. And ultimately now, neither of these sides, the only thing that will give is the political environment off the battlefield. And that political environment is not going to come from Tehran. It's going to come from Washington, D.C., where the midterms and Trump's inability to command control over a democracy in the same way that an autocratic centralized system like that of the IRGC, Islamic Republic, isn't going to happen. So ultimately, I'm going to continue to cover this, but every single explosion or every single heightened moment is perhaps more like a compilation of some of the biggest developments of the past few days, because the intensity there is just not going to happen. And neither side is going to give. What's going to give is the political theatre and the dramaticism. The most entertaining fact of all of this is Trump's lunacy and his comments on Twitter, X, whatever, online, stating his outrage, his dissatisfaction with the whole situation, his dislike and everything. Okay, mate, that's great. You keep being dissatisfied. If I'm an IRGC commander in Tehran, I'm just laughing. I'm having a great time. Money's being consolidated, power's being consolidated, America's being undermined, energy controls are being consolidated, new relationships are being formed. I'm doing all right. Are things perfect? No. But I have full control of the population. If there's any dissidents, if there's any resistance, we smack that out immediately. Whilst you, mate, at your home in Mar-a-Lago, you've got other things to worry about as well. Your voter base for one, your poll ratings for another, the economy for third, and of course the little awkward thing that despite all of this, the United States is still a democracy. And so one hopes that Trump's power will be checked in further and that this will eventually come to some kind of significant close. But I find it hard to believe that over the next 2 months, anything's going to change. We may well see a restoration of the MOU, but again, an MOU is not a peace deal. It is simply an understanding that we have a bunch of stuff that we need to sort out still. If you've got the tip of the iceberg, it's the tip, and then all the other stuff underneath the water is what you've actually, the meat and vegetables, the actual core of the substance you still actually have to get to. So this may well go round and round in circles. And I once said back in March, April, that maybe this whole thing would be wrapped by May, June. But that was before I realized that the administration would continue to think that it can somehow leverage power through a means of a blockade or very unidimensional methods against a force as comprehensive and deeply seated, as I say, as the IRGC. So I'm saying it now, but this is not going to change. Nothing is going to change for the next few months, I don't think, the next few weeks, until there is an inflection point outside of the main theatre of conflict, or main theatre of activity, i.e. the Hormuz Strait. Nothing's going to change unless Trump dies, unless Trump is impeached, unless the IRGC somehow goes through Mojtaba, decides to sort of go full democratic, unless we get something like a Syria where I know the Pakistanis decide to invade because they want to take over Balochistan, unless there's a significant shock event somewhere else, nothing's going to change. Or, of course, it's a shock event that is reactionary, i.e. the economy, global economy, starts showing real bad signs that the Americans are like, oh, crap, and then they withdraw. But otherwise, nothing's going to shift majorly. So I'll continue to cover this with the experts that we have on the show, everyone. But I wanted to sort of take this moment to sort of just share some of my clarified thoughts and a bit of a vent, and say, yes, I'm coming to you from a different location. I'm currently in Croatia. I do travel a lot, so the backgrounds change all the time. And I've also actually got a bit of a cold, which is delightful, but I thought I would still go online nonetheless. We will be back tomorrow, Larry Johnson, to discuss some of what we said today. And then I may well be hosting a couple of Malcolm Nance, hopefully on Friday, and Alan Erie, the another Middle Eastern expert. But yeah, otherwise, I hope you're having a good summer, everyone. We'll speak soon. Have a good one. Take care.